No.
Hello? Is it on? It is on?
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me, sorry. I can't really hear it that well. Okay, that's good enough. As long as you can hear me, that's what's important. Good morning, everyone. I'm, again, happy to be here and to see all of you, and what a wonderful crowd we have today. So it's always nice in the middle of summer to see a happy group of Buddhists together. I was here last month, and since then I knew I was going to be here today, and have been pondering what it is I wanted to talk about. And I had a little bit of a difficulty. I was telling Terry and Amori this morning how I sort of had a Dharma block. Couldn't really think of what it was I wanted to share with you. So I was reading, I was looking at books, I was looking at, anyway, it took a little while. Finally I got inspired, and hopefully this will be the result, and maybe you'll be able to learn something. So, where's my, are you clicking? Oh, you're gonna click, okay, next. So this is the topic that I decided on. It's called Tradition and Creativity, the Arising of American Shin Buddhism. So hopefully I can shed a little bit of light on that for you today. Next. So this topic actually came from Dr. Haneda. Some of you know Dr. Haneda, and he has done some classes here. How many are familiar with Dr. Haneda? Yes, okay. Important teacher for me and for many of you. And I use his book, Dharma Breeze, as a source for a lot of learning. And so I was thumbing through this book in my dilemma of looking for a topic, and stumbled across a chapter called Tradition and Creativity, and incorporating parts of what he has said in that chapter. So we'll see how that all plays out. Okay, next slide, please. So we have these two ideas, tradition and creativity, and Dr. Haneda asks, are they opposites? What is the relationship of tradition and creativity, and how do they mesh together? Is there a synergy that can be attributed to combining those two? So I didn't really know how to depict tradition and creativity, but I thought, okay, housing might be a good way to do it. And we have in architecture traditional modes of architecture, and then we have very creative ways to represent architecture. So let's explore, are they really opposites? Next. And then Dr. Haneda talks about tradition and creativity in the context of the contrast between the United States and Japan. Those are two countries he's very familiar with. He was born and raised in Japan, was educated at Tokyo University, and then he spent the last 40 years in the United States, so he knows both countries quite well. And he explained that this is maybe a good example of the contrast between tradition and creativity. In Japan, we have a very traditional country that honors and respects its tradition and heritage. The United States, very new country. We don't have the same kinds of traditions. People have come from all over the world, and we have an American culture, but not the same kind of thousands of year-old traditions that they have in Japan. He says there are benefits to both having a long tradition and also the ability to be very creative. I think he said in some respects, if in Japan, how they incorporate or treasure their tradition is beautiful. But he says it also doesn't allow them to be very creative a lot of times. Sometimes people are afraid to move away from tradition, whereas in the United States, we often don't have that same problem. The downside of not having a long tradition is that we don't have a long tradition. We don't have the same kinds of centuries-old traditions that we can call and identify as truly an American tradition. We're building them, but we still don't have them. But his feeling is that what you want to do is to combine the two together. You want to be able to use tradition and creativity in a way that builds on each other. And so hopefully my talk today will talk about that in a Buddhist context. But let's go to a couple more examples. Next slide. So we are all familiar in the realms of dance, music, sports, or any endeavor that requires a tremendous amount of training and practice. It is important, it's imperative for anyone who wants to pursue any of those kinds of endeavors to spend a lot of time to really learn the fundamentals. You don't go out and do something on the piano or in dance unless you have been trained for years and years and years. I chose the sport of hockey because that's a sport very close, near and dear to my husband and my heart. We had a son who spent years being a hockey player, and of course this applies to any athlete. And he had to do lots and lots of training in order to be able to become the player that he eventually became. So we are very familiar with this in all those kinds of contexts. Next. But then Dr. Haneda talks about other examples where tradition and creativity come together. And he talks very at length about the story of Dharmakara that comes to us from the larger sutra. He says that this is an example or a template for all of us to follow. In the larger sutra, there's a story of a king. This is a fictional story because it's not a true king. But this king encounters a Buddha by the name of Lokesh Vararaja. He encounters this king this Buddha who inspires him and raises in this king this aspiration to also want to become a Buddha. And so he asked Lokesh Vararaja, how do I become a Buddha? And Vararaja wouldn't tell him initially until he kept pestering him and asking him, and he said, well, you must learn from all Buddhas. You must spend a great amount of time to learn from all the teachers that are in the universe. And so this king becomes what we call a bodhisattva. He becomes Bodhisattva Dharmakara, and he spends 5 kalpas, which is an immense amount of time. It is an unbelievable amount of time. But during that time, in this story, he goes to all the Buddhas and all the Buddha lands. He does what is called kuyo practice in order to learn from all the Buddhas in the universe. And he learns and he incorporates their traditions, the learning that he needs to get in order to become a Buddha. So he does this kuyo practice for 5 kalpas, and then he contemplates for another 5 kalpas on the best way to become a Buddha, to create a Buddha land, to help save or help all sentient beings. And so 10 kalpas of time elapsed, but through his intense practice over 5 kalpas, he was able to create the Pure Land. And that's the story that comes out of the larger sutra. By respecting the tradition of all of these Buddhas, he was able to create this new land and a new way for awakening. Next. So, Dr. Haneda contends that you have to go further than your teacher. It's fine to inculcate the traditions, the disciplines of your teachers, but then he quotes these 2 Zen expressions. When you meet a Buddha, kill him. When you meet a teacher, kill him. Take one more step beyond the 100-foot pole. Well, this sounds rather drastic. The meaning of that is that you learn from your teacher. You incorporate and take in everything that you can, but then you go beyond what your teacher has taught you. You don't stay stuck in the tradition, in the old modes of way of what you had been taught. You need to take what you have learned and to go further. And that's what that expression is trying to convey to you in a very dramatic way. I hope you literally don't kill any of your teachers. Next one. And so then he says that Shinran also did exactly that. We all know that Shinran's story is he became a monk at 9. For 20 years he was on Mount Hiei trying to attain awakening, very frustrated. He learned all the traditions, did all the practices very sincerely and diligently, and it was not possible for him. In frustration, he left Mount Hiei and encountered Honen Shonin. And from Honen Shonin, he was able to find what he had been looking for. And so he spent the next, well, from the age of 29 until 90, developing, refining, and creating his own formulation of Buddhism. And how he did that was that he took the teachings from his teachers, from not just Honen, but from Shakyamuni Buddha, from a group of teachers that he called the Seven Masters. He read the sutras, and he read them diligently and very carefully, and spent years and years developing his formulation of the Shin path to awakening. And so he included in his formulation these aspects. I'd like to highlight the Kyogo Shinsho. Some of you are familiar with that. That is considered Shinran's magnum opus. He created this when he was in his 50s, early 60s, and then revised it over the rest of his life, which was several decades. But the Kyogo Shinsho, interestingly enough, is 80% the writings of others. He wanted to he wanted to honor and show his respect for his teachers, and there's only 20% of the Kyogo Shinshu that is actually Shinran's own writings. And an interesting comment that Dr. Haneda says that the title of his work is called A Collection of Passages That Reveal the True Teaching, Practice, and Attainment of the Pure Land Tradition. And it says, collected by foolish, bald-headed Shinran, a disciple of Shakyamuni. So in that way that he depicted or labeled this work, he called it a collection. He didn't say this was written by bald-headed, stubble-haired Shinran, but it was a collection of the writings and from the teachers that he respected and admired. But interestingly, he went beyond. He went beyond his teachers, and he created a formulation of Buddhism that was truly radical. That's one thing I think maybe we don't often talk about, is the fact that Shinran was, in many respects, a truly revolutionary and radical thinker. He never expected that there would be a tradition, a separate school of Buddhism that would arise out of his teachings and his writings. He always considered himself a disciple of Honen, and so he probably would be amazed to see that Jodo Shinshu, or Shin Buddhism as we call it here in the West, is a tradition that came out of his writings that went beyond what everyone else had done before. But he definitely gives credit to all of the teachers that came before him. So aspects of the Jodo Shinshu path, or the Shin path, is that it's a reliance on deep listening. He talks about Shinjin, awakening, the entrusting heart, and the purpose of Nembutsu being a way for us to express our thanks and gratitude for the gift of awakening. It's also a practice that is available to everyone. It's very lay-oriented. We do not have monks or monastics. It's for everyone. It includes everyone. We don't have limitations on who can be a person to follow our path. And he also was very clear that he rejected things like petitionary prayer and superstitions. You know, he lived in the 12th and 13th century. It was a time that people still believed in ghosts and spirits and gods, and you know, that's understandable, but he didn't deny their existence, but he said that those were not helpful on the path to awakening, to liberation. So he said, don't bother with those things. They really don't help you. And so, and the other more remarkable thing, aspect of his teachings was that if you attain this Shinjin awakening, it was what he considered true settlement in this life. Many of the Buddhist paths require you to spend many lifetimes in pursuit of this ideal of enlightenment. But Shinran said that a Shinjin awakening experience in this lifetime is equal to Maitreya, who is in mythology is the next Buddha. So through the Shinjin experience, you have an awakening encounter. You live a life of Nembutsu. You are totally changed by the encounter with the Buddhist teachings. So he really radicalized Buddhism, made it very accessible for everyone, and in a way that we can all understand and connect to. Next. So going on this theme of tradition and creativity, where I want to move into, what do we do here in America with the Shin Buddhist tradition? And how are we planning to take our tradition and create something that is for 21st century America? And I wanted to point out that statue of Shinran is a very significant one. This is a statue that is currently in front of the New York Buddhist Temple, and it was donated from Hiroshima. And it was a Shinran statue that had experienced the atomic bombing in 1945 and was a gift from the city of Hiroshima to the Buddhist Temple of New York. And so you can see that, maybe not very clearly, but there's some red stains on the bottom of the statue, but it actually encountered the atomic bombing. So from that standpoint, it is a beautiful metaphor for bridging old Japan, the traditions of Japan, and it's now in the United States. So it has a lot of meaning. All right, next. So now I want to turn to a person by the name of Robert Wright, who's somebody that's called an evolutionary psychologist. And he wrote a book called Why Buddhism is True. And I have to thank the Vista book club when I was here the last month. This is a book that they were going to be discussing in July. And I was here on the day that they actually had the discussion. I wasn't a part of it, but we also did this book for the OCBC book club. And it is a book that explains how evolution and natural selection has influenced or made us in a way that that are sometimes not very conducive to our ability to see the world and to see ourselves in life clearly. So he has a lot of scientific evidence and a lot of interesting aspects of why we are the way we are. Next. So his description of evolutionary psychology is that it's the study of how the human brain was designed by natural selection to mislead us and to even enslave us. Now that's a pretty heavy kind of statement to make. But he goes through an entire book to explain how things that natural selection selected for as humanity are sometimes not very conducive for our happiness or for our ability to see life and the world very clearly. So next slide. So he was, in his book, this book, Why Buddhism is True, the very first chapter, he talks about this movie, The Matrix. In fact, chapter 1 is called Taking the Red Pill. How many of you are familiar with the movie The Matrix? Okay, I was astounded to realize that this movie's now 20 years old. It was made in 1999, back when Keanu Reeves was like super hot, and he was like the heartthrob of every many women, including myself. So this was a really amazing movie. But Robert Wright says that it also had a tremendous significance for a group of people he calls Western Buddhists. But I'll get to that in just a moment. So one of the things that he found out from a few years after this movie came out is that the directors, the Wachowski brothers, I think, and they were the directors of this movie, they had Keanu Reeves read 3 books in preparation for his role as Neo in this movie. And one of the books that they had him read was Robert Wright's book, The Moral Animal, Why We Are the Way We Are. And it talks about the new science of evolutionary psychology. And so I guess the directors felt that there were aspects of this book that would be very helpful for Keanu Reeves in terms of preparing for this role as Neo in The Matrix. Is there anyone who's not familiar with the story? Okay, yeah, I've got somebody who's less than 20 years old. So Matrix it's a kind of a sci-fi movie, and in this movie, Neo, who is Keanu Reeves, discovers that all of humanity has been kind of duped by this robo-world that have kind of taken over the world. What they've done with all humans is they put them into pods. And I assume that the purpose of putting them in pods is, first of all, to control them, but to also to sap their energy or some kind of force from humans. Anyway, all humans are in these pods, and they're kind of hooked up to this world called the Matrix. They're in this dream world. They think that they are in fact in reality. They have lives, they have jobs, they have families, but all of it is it's a delusion. It's a big illusion. Their mind is being controlled by these robots. So Neo is kind of taken from his pod and introduced to this group of rebels who are trying to fight against these robots that are controlling the world. And what they want him to do is to become their champion. For some reason, he was kind of singled out as the one. And he's very reluctant. He says, I don't know why you think I'm the one, but he kind of goes along with them. And so there's a very telling scene in the film where there's a character played by Lawrence Fishburne whose name is Morpheus. And he tells Neo, you have a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. If you take the blue pill, you can return to your world of delusion, this comfortable world that you think is reality, and live out the rest of your life. If you take the red pill, then you will be able to see truth and reality and be rescued from a world of delusion. So he takes the red pill. Of course, it wouldn't be a story without him taking the red pill. So what happened with this movie is that it became kind of an anthem for a group of people called Western Buddhists, because it illustrated the fact that maybe all of us are living in a world of delusion. Well, that's kind of what the Buddha has been saying, or Buddha said 2,500 years ago, that we don't see reality clearly, we don't see life clearly, that we see life from our very narrow perspective. And what evolutionary psychology is saying is that we were hardwired to do that by natural selection. And during the study class, we will kind of talk about some of those features. So anyway, so Neo decides that he wants to escape from delusion, and he eventually does free all of humanity, so becomes a great hero. Next. So Robert Wright's talking about why this movie resonated so much with a group of people that he called Western Buddhists and Western Buddhism. And so we're kind of a part of that conversation, but I would have to say that Western Buddhism sort of doesn't know about Shin Buddhism very much. Western Buddhism, it comprises mostly people who maybe weren't raised Buddhists. They're people from the West who maybe became disillusioned with their upbringing, with the religion that they were raised with, and they were looking for something more or different, and they found Buddhism. Well, the Buddhism that they found in general tended to be more like Tibetan Buddhism, Buddhism from Thailand, which is like Theravadan Buddhism, or Zen. I mean, they kind of, everyone kind of in the United States is familiar with the Dalai Lama, they're familiar with who's Tibetan, they're familiar with Zen Buddhism, and they're many times familiar with Theravadan, which all of these forms of Buddhism tend to be monastic. And so what the Western Buddhists kind of gleaned from these traditions are Buddhist philosophy and meditation. Interestingly, I don't know if you know this or not, but most Buddhists don't meditate, and most Buddhists don't follow a monastic path. Most of the Buddhists in the world are kind of everyday people. It'd be hard to have a tradition where everybody's a monastic, so who would do all the work, right? So, but the Western Buddhists have taken meditation and Buddhist philosophy, and they've kind of created a form of Western Buddhism, which he finds, he says that, and The Matrix became a kind of an anthem for them. They were that way before the movie, but it really kind of reinforced this idea that, you know, that we do live in a lot of delusion. Okay, next. So, according to them, we are metaphorically speaking living in the Matrix. And that's what we're trying to escape from. Okay, next. So the answer is to awaken from delusion and to take the red pill. So their answer, the Western Buddhists, most of them, their answer was Buddhist philosophy, meditation. There are many, many books on meditation and mindfulness meditation, and it's been very effective. There have been many studies about the efficacy of meditation practice, and though they're all valid, and so many people are finding that it is a very useful practice. Next. So what does Shin bring to the table? What do we contribute to the Western Buddhist sort of scene? And these are the aspects that I think are most salient. You know, we have, as I mentioned, a lay-centered practice with accessibility for all. We do not reject anyone from our practice. We have a de-emphasis of mystical aspects. Shin has always been one that, as I mentioned, we don't follow petitionary prayers. We don't have Omamorila. In Japan, they have these little like charms that some of the temples and shrines offer. It's something that you will never find in a Jodo Shinshu temple in Japan. We don't believe in things like luck and, you know, praying for things. What we do is we have a heavy reliance on our teachers and teachings, and that's critical to our understanding. As I mentioned, Shinjin is awakening experience in this lifetime. We can be what Shinran calls is truly settled, and that's what we want to be. It's not just talking about being settled for after you die. It's about fundamentally changing your life in a way where you can be fulfilled, you can have meaning, and that you see the world in a way with that is with a lot of grace and gratitude. And it is a very simple practice. We are, you know, if you're relying on teachers and teachings, and listening is really, really important. And of course, Nembutsu is a way for us to express our gratitude for that. And if this is a authentic Buddhist tradition, you know, we've got a history of well, we have this 2,500 year history starting back from Shakyamuni, but Shin Buddhism has its roots in 12th century Japan, so it's got 800 years of tradition. In Japan, there are something like 20,000 Jodo Shinshu temples. So I think that's some validity, that we have some staying power. And more recently, we are incorporating meditation. It is not and has never been a part of Jodo Shinshu, but here in the United States, we are incorporating it. So it's not in all of our temples, but we have also found the benefits of meditation. It's not a way to enlightenment, but it's a way for us to allow us to be prepared to listen and accept the teachings. So we do meditation. There's meditation here at Vista Temple, and there's meditation at OCBC. There are, I would say, half the temples in our BCA maybe incorporate some form of meditation. We're finding that it's useful, and I think in America it makes a lot of sense. Next. So, according to Shinran, he said that we must listen to the words of our teaching. And for him, listening was critical. It was liberation itself. Honoring tradition is everything, and it leads to the realization of the true self, that is creativity itself. Through listening, through the traditions of our teachers, we're able to access something that we call the true self. And hopefully that will allow you to be the most creative and fulfilled human being that you can possibly conceive for yourself. And that's our wish for all of you. And the next slide, I want to show you some of the people that are my teachers. So we have Shinran, of course, but he is part of a long line of teachers. The grouping in the top left-hand corner are so-called 7 masters. They include 2 Indians, 3 Chinese masters, and 2 Japanese masters. And so for Shinran, those people were very critical to him, along with many other teachers. For me, more recently, of course, we have Reverend Harada, who has been my mentor and teacher, and next to him is Reverend Tetsu Uno, also an important teacher. And then we have 3 19th, early 20th century teachers from Japan who completely revolutionized the way that Jodo Shinshu and Shin Buddhism is thought of here currently. So I couldn't put everybody in there. I almost put in my mother and her best friend Sachi, and I would have had 100 people there. But these are some significant people who have made a difference in my life. And hopefully all of you will have teachers like that who help you to come to an understanding of what it really does mean to be liberated. And I wanted to say that I thought, Ondoku-san, I know you do this one a lot, but I love the fact that it talks about such is the benevolence of the Tathagata's great compassion that I must strive to repay it even if my body turns to dust. Such is the benevolence of the masters and true teachers that I will thank them until my bones have crumbled. So Ondoku-san also is a place that we honor and cherish our teachers, and hopefully we go beyond what they teach us. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida